5 World Cups, more than any other nation on earth. For most of football history, Brazil wasn't just a team, it was the standard everyone else was measured against.
Juninho Pernambucano and striker Adriano, who scored on this ground in the final of the Confederations Cup against Argentina just 12 months ago, also sustained a knock in the win over Ghana. So Gilberto Silva, he steps up from the substitutes bench as well.
So how did that same country need a stoppage time goal just to beat Paraguay and scrape into the 2026 World Cup? How did it burn through 3 head coaches in under 2 years, get its own football federation dismantled by a court order, and then get eliminated in the round of 16 by a nation that hadn't reached a World Cup in almost 30 years? This isn't a story about one bad tournament. It's a story about how a footballing empire quietly came apart on the field and off it. To understand the fall, you have to understand how high Brazil was standing. 5 World Cup titles, 1958, 1962, 1970, 1994, and 2002, more than double what most footballing nations have ever managed. Brazil is the only country to have played in every single World Cup since the tournament began in 1930. For decades, Brazilian football wasn't just a nationality, it was practically its own genre, associated with flair, improvisation, and producing more world-class attacking talent than anywhere else on the planet. But dominance like that creates its own kind of pressure. Every generation since 2002 has been measured against players like Pelé, Ronaldo, and Romario, and increasingly they've come up short on the biggest stage. The cracks didn't start in 2026. They started over a decade earlier, and Brazil spent years papering over them with individual talent instead of fixing what was actually broken underneath. The warning signs were loud, even if people didn't want to hear them. In 2014, hosting the World Cup on home soil, Brazil suffered the most humiliating defeat in its history. A 7-1 semifinal collapse against Germany, still remembered in Brazil simply as the Mineirazo. It should have triggered a full rebuild. Instead, Brazil went to Russia in 2018 as favorites again and lost in the quarterfinals to Belgium. 4 years later in Qatar, another golden generation built around Neymar, Vinicius Jr., and a supposedly unstoppable attacking line went out in the quarterfinals again, beaten by Croatia on penalties. 3 tournaments, 3 exits well before the final. Individually, each one could be explained away: bad luck, a red-hot opponent, a refereeing decision. Together, they told a different story. A team that could still produce brilliant individual footballers, but couldn't consistently build a team, a system, or a plan around them. While the team struggled on the pitch, the organization running Brazilian football was falling apart behind the scenes, and this is the part most fans outside Brazil never hear about. 3 consecutive presidents of the CBF, Brazil's football confederation, were removed amid corruption scandals over the previous decade, each banned from the sport by FIFA. Their replacement, Rogério Caboclo, was suspended in 2021 over a sexual harassment case. His successor, Edinaldo Rodrigues, was elected in 2022 and was then removed from office by a Brazilian court in December 2023 over irregularities in his own election, reinstated weeks later by the Supreme Court, re-elected unanimously in March 2025, and then removed again just 2 months after that, in May 2025, when a court found what it called possible forgery in his employment contract. Here's the part that makes it almost unbelievable, that final removal happened just 3 days after the CBF finally landed the coach it had been chasing for years. Brazilian football's governing body was being dismantled by court order in the same week it announced the man meant to save the national team. On the field, things were arguably even messier. Brazil went through 3 different head coaches during the 2026 qualification campaign. Ramon Menezes started as a caretaker. Fernando Diniz took over next, trying to bring his possession-heavy club philosophy to the national team without the results to back it up. He was replaced by Dorival Jr., who was sacked after Brazil suffered a 4-1 defeat away to Argentina, their fiercest rival in Buenos Aires. By the time qualification ended, Brazil had finished 5th in the 10-team South American group, managing just 28 points. Statistically, their worst World Cup qualifying campaign ever. Argentina, by contrast, ran away with the group. For a country used to cruising through qualifiers, needing a nervy, last-gasp 1-0 win over Paraguay, just to lock in a spot at the tournament was almost unthinkable. That winning goal, fittingly, didn't come under any of the 3 previous coaches. It came in the very first match of Brazil's 4th head coach in 2 years, the man the federation had been trying and failing to hire since 2023. In May 2025, Brazil did something it had never done in its entire footballing history. It hired a foreign head coach for the men's national team. Carlo Ancelotti, fresh off leaving Real Madrid, a manager with 5 Champions League titles to his name, became the first non-Brazilian ever to take charge of the Seleção. It was in itself an admission. For over a century, Brazil had insisted that only a Brazilian could understand Brazilian football. Bringing in Ancelotti was effectively the federation saying, "We don't trust anyone here to fix this anymore." And for a while it worked. Ancelotti steadied the ship, secured qualification, and led Brazil to a comfortable group stage campaign at the 2026 World Cup, including a dramatic stoppage time win over Japan. Neymar, back from a long ACL injury, was recalled for a 4th World Cup appearance. Vinicius Jr. looked like the team's new focal point, scoring 4 goals in the group stage alone. Then came the round of 16 against Norway, a team that hadn't even qualified for a World Cup since 1998. Nobody expected a shock. For most of the match, Brazil looked comfortable. And then, in the final 11 minutes, Erling Haaland scored twice. Neymar converted a stoppage time penalty that barely mattered by the time it went in. Brazil, 5-time champions, were eliminated in the round of 16 by a team playing in its first World Cup in almost 3 decades. It was, in a strange way, the perfect ending to this particular story. A brief, real recovery under new leadership, undone in the final minutes by exactly the kind of defensive lapse this team had been quietly living with for over a decade. So what actually happened to Brazil? It wasn't one single failure. It was years of accumulated cracks finally showing at once. A federation more consumed by corruption scandals and court battles than long-term planning. A coaching philosophy that changed every year instead of building anything lasting. A golden generation of attacking talent that kept getting eliminated because the team around them was never quite finished. Ancelotti has bought Brazil some time and maybe even a foundation to rebuild on. But the deeper question, whether Brazilian football can fix what's broken in its boardrooms, not just on its bench, is still completely unanswered. If you want the next one, we'll be looking at Argentina, Germany, or another footballing giant in decline. Let us know in the comments which one. And if you think Brazil can turn this around before the next World Cup, you might be more optimistic than the Seleção's own fans are right now.